Negativity sells. It always has. A negative news spreads like wildfire, while a positive one gradually fizzles out. Lately, there has been this hate for Indians which is very visible online. This hate or racism against Desis is not something new. Indians have witnessed it all through the period of colonization. Then, even when India got free, there was a long duration in which racism was something that any person of color had to face. That was also a time for economic turmoil, much like right now. From the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, Indians in the West, especially in countries like Canada, US, and England, faced the brunt of racism, in which Indians, even the ones who were born in these countries, were considered as second-class citizens. Back in the 70s and the 80s, the National Front in UK made immigrants the reason for all the troubles that England was going through. The us versus them, even back then, was directing all its hate on us Indians. I've got this amazing video by Rohan Davis, which delves into the racism against immigrants and Indians in England back in the 70s and the 80s. I'll link it in the description or somewhere up here. But in today's video, I'm going to talk about today's reality. The hate that the Indians are facing right now. I would delve into what happened before, how Indians were perceived, and how gradually indifference became hate. So let's go back to the 90s. This was a time when the anti-racist movements across the world had established one thing. Racism is wrong. Racism being wrong did not make a difference to some, because people of color were still being hated, but this time they came up with new reasons. India was always looked up as a destination for meditation, yoga, and spirituality. At the same time, India was also looked at as this unclean country struggling with poverty. Even the best movies that came out with India in its backdrop, like Slumdog Millionaire, pushed the same narrative right across to the Western audience. For the West, Indians were always considered as these brown-skinned people who have a lot of kids. There's something that The Simpsons portrayed in the 90s with the character called Apu, who was this side character, Indian with a funny accent and lots of kids. Shows like Family Guy did pretty much the same, in which India was always this dirty country with lots and lots of people. In the start of the 21st century, the tech revolution happened, and the Indians were pioneers in driving this revolution. In the Silicon Valley of India, that is Bangalore, or the one in US in California. The engineers, doctors, and nurses from India started flooding these countries, and that's when Apu was replaced by Rajesh Kutrapalli from Big Bang Theory.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
The Indians became this nerdy, socially awkward people who were trying to fit in to the US culture. These are the stereotypes which basically told the West what being Indian is all about. So there were these two types of Indians in mind of a typical Westerner. One was a nerdy, socially awkward person, and the other India was the one that was extremely poor, struggling to live a good life. Neither of the two were really a picture to be proud of. In the early 21st century, the tech pioneers from India were taking over the tech industry. That's something that hasn't stopped. Even today, the top tech companies of US are headed by Indians who probably came to US in and around that time, got their education from there, and went on to lead these big businesses. But in the early 21st century, the other thing that happened was 9/11. For the white Westerner, anybody who was not white was looked at with suspicion. They were scared of the different culture that was coming in, that was flooding their streets. The one thing that we should remember that in the late 90s and the early 2000s, the Desis were still getting a grip of the situation. They were still trying to figure out how to assimilate with the new culture and the country that they're part of. They were mostly invisible in social life because they were still trying to figure out how to be part of this new society. But with time, as the West was flooded by the Desis, they started forming their own community. They became more confident about themselves, and then the norms from India started being very visible even in these Western countries. Now, there were two problems here. There were the Indians who were taking over the highly skilled jobs in their tech industry, and then there were Indians who were taking over the blue collar jobs in the same country. The West was scared. But obviously, they could not be openly racist and call them out. What ended up happening is immigration again became one of the biggest reasons for all the troubles in their country. Back in the 60s and the 70s, National Front from UK did something very similar. The reason for all their troubles ended up being the immigrants. A narrative was built up pushing the disgruntled to find a scapegoat that they can blame everything on. The scapegoats back in 60s and 70s in UK were the brown-skinned Desis, and today it's quite similar. The housing trouble in countries like Canada and Australia is blamed on immigrants. And since the Desis are the one who form the biggest chunk of this immigrant population, they are the one who are going to be blamed for all these problems. You cannot be obviously racist because you'll be called out for it. So they start blaming and finding other reasons to hate Indians. It was easy to magnify the mistakes of the Indian community in the world of internet.
That her friend witnessed a group of beachgoers using their tent on the beach as a toilet.
So she was pointing out to me, this is where they filled it in, and she personally seen them using it.
This and several other videos about people defecating on the beach have garnered hundreds of thousands of views.
I started this video by stating that negativity sells and it gets compounded too. So one video of one Desi doing a mistake, once recorded and put online, it gets a lot of views from the people in the West as well as the billions of Desis across the world. Every small mistake by an Indian made viral on social media. When people noticed that stuff like this is getting viral, they created more and more of them. So this wasn't just the Westerners who were creating such videos and shaming Indians. Even the Indians were doing this because at the end of the day, in the world of social media, it's the virality that sells. So you'll see both Desis as well as Western content creators who were just magnifying all these mistakes and making sure that their content goes viral without realizing that it is causing generalization of what a Desi is all about. Now, I'm not saying that Desis are not at fault. I agree there are some Desis who haven't really understood that the culture that we had back in India or in the Indian subcontinent is not the same as what we have in the West. In the West, it's all about being patient and being considerate about others. But in the Indian subcontinent, where there's so much competition and struggle to get ahead in life, the Desis often forget that you have to be considerate about others. This is a genuine problem and it is something that Desis are trying to work on. But this is something that gets amplified when it stands out in a Western culture. I created this video about what to be careful about when you're in a foreign country outside of Indian subcontinent. It should be linked somewhere here or in the description. Make sure you check that video to understand what I'm talking about. Lately, there has been an influx of migrants from the Desi community, which have been totally exploiting the resources of the host country. They're exploiting the benevolence of the host country. They are rude in public, loud and crass. And at every opportunity, they want to exploit the migration policies of these countries. It's making life tough for everyone. The existing citizens, the prospective migrants, every single one of them. This is something that I totally condemn. What these Desis are doing is bringing rest of us bad name. There have been cases where these Desis are actually taking the law in their own hand. They are loud, they are crass, they are stealing. None of that is something that I would ever condone. These Desis are bringing bad name to the community. So don't expect this to be a justification. When I say mistakes, I genuinely mean about small acts which are done by mistake. But when you're actually stealing stuff, exploiting the social welfare, there is no excuse for it. I just thought I need to make this clear before rest of this video. Now, coming back to the basic question, are the Indians really hated by the West? I would say there are some elements of racism here, and some of our mistakes are causing us to be considered as the other culture. But I believe that most of the Westerners don't really hate India. They just don't understand India as much, because in their mind there is an impression about India which has been developed by the Western media. Now, there are people who are inherently racist, and then there are Indians who are making a bunch of mistakes when in the Western society. But as per me, both of them are a minority. But here's what ends up happening: the extremes are usually the loudest. The racists often want to justify their action by hiding it under a garb of something else. For example, in the West, there's a very high likelihood that a racist would justify their actions in the garb of either free speech or calling out what is obviously wrong. There are many problems in the West right now because of the high costs and housing issues. But the root cause for that are bad government policies. There's something similar to what the Northern Front did in UK back in the 60s and the 70s, and what the right-wing mouthpieces are doing right now. They make the class war about culture war. The government have ruined many countries because of their bad policies, but they want a scapegoat, and in this case, the scapegoat is the other culture, which is destroying the culture of the host country. The visitors, the immigrants, need to make sure that they respect the culture of the country that they are in. It paints a really bad picture when you openly flaunt the rules of the host country. It's these rules and regulations what make these countries great. You cannot come in and decide that rules are for fools, something that many desis have been taught from very early childhood. I personally think that many Indians believe that breaking rules gives them power, and that's a mentality that they bring in to the West. I think such individuals have to know that it's the rules of these countries that make these countries great. So please make sure that you abide by them. If you're partying, go ahead, do it. But if there are rules which tell you that the party needs to stop at 10, no loud noises after 12, then please adhere to these rules. When you migrate to these countries, there are certain rights that you have. Make sure that you remember these rights and ensure that nobody exploits you. But at the same time, with these rights, there are certain duties that you need to follow. Please make sure that you follow these duties. I've lived outside of India for over a decade now and have rarely come across anyone from any of these Western countries who are obviously rude or racist to me. There have been a few instances, but they were no different than the racism that I have witnessed back in India. So call out racism against you, but at the same time realize that not everyone is like that. Now, as a migrant, we have a responsibility of representing our countries in the Western world. Any mistake that you do, any behavior that is not in line with the society that you are part of will get magnified and will get exposed online. So please make sure that you are at your best behavior when you're visiting or you're living in a country that is different than your own. We at Global Desis make sure we can present a true picture of living outside India to the people who have just come to these countries or the ones back home. This is an attempt by me and Vivian to present the true picture of the world outside of India. We have been at it for almost 1 year now, and I'm happy to say that we are about to hit 200 subscribers. That number might not seem too big for you, but for us, 200 people who trust us is a very big number. So thanks a lot to all the subscribers. Now, there are different things that I spoke about in this video as to how we should behave when we are outside of our home country. So this video would give you more details on that aspect. And then there is this amazing video that Vivian made on how India is projecting itself to the world, on whether it's being assertive or arrogant. If you want to check out that video, then that's right here. Hope these videos are informative, and for more such videos, please hit the subscribe button. Have a good day.